Hi, Dr. P here to talk about games and interactivity. Classical board and card games were highly interactive between the players. Your interaction was with the players, and the game provided the field for that. But now we use the word games much more broadly to include things which are technically puzzles and things which aren't even games or puzzles but perhaps toys. Interactivity with people is a requirement for classic games, but for the so-called games that are actually puzzles, the interaction is with the game. There are two major types of interaction, as I said, with the game or the environment, the system, which in video games is called PvE, or player versus environment, and interaction with people, which obviously requires at least two players. That's highly psychological, and that's sometimes called in video games PvP, or player versus player. And there are several flavors of interaction. In one group you have interaction that's targeted and unmediated. There's nothing in between, where you're trying to hinder someone or help someone. And the other kind there is anticipatory, where you're blocking someone, you see what they might be doing or what they could do, and you act to prevent that. The first type is much more common in war games, and the second type is much more common in Euro-style games. Then in the second group you have direct interaction, which is player to player between their assets that they fully control, and there's indirect, where they're intermediating entities, where the assets involved may only be temporarily controlled by one of the players or by both the players. Interaction with the game, everything you do depends on what the game does. So that's typical of single-player video games and MMOs. The general advantage of interacting with a game rather than with other people is there's no person to get mad at. There's no clash of egos. This is also seen in many tabletop board games and card games that can sometimes be called multiplayer solitaire. You have no reason to be annoyed with another player because you're playing against the game, not against the other people. In effect, you're solving a puzzle. Now, the advantage of multiplayer solitaire is that it enables personal interaction outside the game. So you can play one of these games with people you like, your friends, and interact with them, and yet you're not doing much to affect one another within the game. Perhaps not doing anything to affect one another within the game. Interaction with people is quite different. Everything you do depends heavily on what other people do in the game, whether there's one other person or several. People are a lot less predictable and a lot more inventive than the game can possibly be, even a video game. We are not yet able to write computer opponents that are anything like as unpredictable and inventive as people. So interaction with people is typical of classic games like chess and checkers and Go and so on. Although tic-tac-toe is solved so you can easily substitute the instructions, the computer programming for example, for the person to no detriment to the game. On the other hand, tic-tac-toe is a game which is essentially trivial, and real gamers don't play tic-tac-toe. Now, many modern players don't like a lot of interaction with other people. They would prefer to play alone. And so puzzles are more attractive to them. Now, within the area of interaction with other people, you have two possibilities. One, where talking with the other players will gain you an advantage or avoid a disadvantage. And that's many players, many games with more than two players. And then the second kind is where talking with the other player typically doesn't make much difference or no difference, which is most games for two players. Single-player games and puzzles have virtually no people interaction. At best, you might be in a situation of a formal puzzle where you try to divine the intent of the person who made the puzzle. Here is a chart to try to illustrate this. You see, card solitaire is highly interactive with the game, but not with people. Diplomacy, a game that's all about negotiation, is highly interactive with the human opposition, but not much with the game. Now, I made this chart some months ago, and when I looked at it recently, I saw Tetris down here in the bottom of never interactive. And that's not exactly never, but it's close, because all you can do is look at what block is coming next. And otherwise, you don't interact with the game in effect. And I would close this with a saying that is naturally aimed at warfare, but kind of gives, in a nutshell, the difference here. From Sir Winston Churchill: no matter how enmeshed a commander becomes in the elaboration of his own thoughts, it is sometimes necessary to take the enemy into account. That's true in a game, it's true in warfare, it's not true in puzzles, because there is no enemy.